to implant a notion that violates the laws of physics.
Of course,
yeah. But that reinforces Graham's point.
Yeah, exactly.
Just doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Laws of physics are suspended too.
I think your sense of it immediately was that the official version and what
I never found the official conspiracy theory plausible.
From
and I
day
looked
one.
for evidence. Well, yeah, and just each type of, well, how would they know who did it? I mean, and who benefited from this? Those were the questions. And then, and the more you got into it, the more you just couldn't believe it. It wasn't until later on that I realized, when physicists started telling me, do you know also the building went down faster than gravity? And then you just go, oh my God. So every time anything new came up, what you do when you're making a rational hypothesis is you look for disconfirming information. I mean, that's a scientific method. You have an hypothesis. The hypothesis is the hypothesis one is the official conspiracy theory. So you look for evidence that will confirm it, and you look for evidence that will disconfirm it. I could find no evidence that really confirmed it. Then the alternative hypothesis, which gets generated by the fact that the official conspiracy theory isn't explaining it, everything you find out actually confirms that the official one, disconfirms the official one, and starts to confirm that something else went on here altogether. And the question is, which we haven't posed tonight, how can you do it? Like, to say X occurred entails that those who did it were capable of doing it. So the evidence for an alternative, the alternative hypothesis, it isn't the way everything that the official conspiracy theory is saying is disconfirmed by the evidence. Now, what does the evidence imply? And I really looked hard to find anything that did confirm it. Like, for example, if anybody got harmed that was from the whole Bush oil military complex, anybody in that whole complex get harmed. Financially or morally or any other way, no. So I was looking for something, because that wouldn't tend to indicate that, well, if it conflicts with their interests, conflicts with what they, the interests of the people who are pulling this off, then that will take the light off them. They won't have done it. But I really couldn't find anything that indicated that everything that went on wasn't completely in their interests. On the other hand, all this evidence that you'd come up, like, the removal of the evidence, the fact that they knew who did it before they had any evidence for it or any conceivable evidence for it, and then, as I say, asking the question, for something to happen, the people who did it have to be able to do it. And hearing from Max von Bülow, I think I remember his name right, who I've signed documents with. He was a former Minister of Defense, or the equivalent in Germany, and he said it was impossible that this action could have been performed by anything but a highly sophisticated apparatus of which only a major state would be capable, or words to that effect. So that made you think, again, well, who's capable of doing it? And so you say, well, because I didn't think that they did it. I thought they perhaps had let it happen. But the more you got into the evidence, then the more it was confirmed, well, they were the only people who were capable of doing it. And so I just leave you with the question, who's capable of doing it? And that will have to be where the evidence points towards, as well as in whose interest it is.
And that's a question. Yeah. That's a question of the structure of the event.
Yes. Yes.
Because the event in the New York spectacle of the event consists of this shock and awe of buildings struck by large aircraft and then collapsing. But for that to occur, you first have to have the entire air defense system out to lunch, disabled,
yes.
Stood down, or whatever.
Stood down.
And it's quite obvious that it's not within the power of a non-inside authority to do that to the American defense system. And then, of course, the evidence that emerged in 2004 was that indeed they were conducting this nesting series of concurrent military exercises that had precisely the effective function of disabling the whole system. Yeah. They had aircraft that were off in Iceland for one exercise, in Alberta and Alaska for another one. Yeah. So they'd thinned out the number available, and then they had the computer screens of the military air traffic controllers filled with blips from a hijacking exercise, so that for the crucial time they didn't know what to do with the comparatively small number of remaining fighters, where to vector them. Now the structure is a very powerful disconfirmation of the official conspiracy theory and confirmation at the same time of an alternative hypothesis.
And it's a very simple thing. If it got done, somebody or people or some agents were capable of doing it. And that question hasn't been asked.
And another coincidence was FEMA, the very dark and secretive agency that Peter Dale Scott, for instance, includes as part of this continuity of government. He says that since 9/11, the Constitution has been changed. There was some secret transformation of the governing structure of the United States that is still in place. But FEMA officers arrive on September the 10th for an exercise on September the 12th. Another
terror exercise,
yeah. So they have arrived there, and of course then they become responsible for cleaning it up. But some would say it wasn't really a matter of cleaning it up; it was a matter of removing the evidence, taking the steel, carting the steel off as quickly as possible, and removing the evidence. So this is Adnan Suberi. And you two are involved in engineering and the University of Waterloo 9/11 study groups.
Sure. Hi there. I'm in mathematical physics, and I created the UW 9/11 research group with the help of really good friends. We started off by first coming together. We didn't form a group right away. First we got to know each other. And then we called up John and Graham and Michael as well, and they were very helpful and supportive, and we created a very massive conference at the university that really shook the university. What we found was that about 400 people came out to the conference, and I believe that was one of the largest numbers of people that have ever come to a North American 9/11 related conference. What we saw was that from the polls and the statistics, about 95% of the people disagreed with the official theory of 9/11, and the numbers were really high, suggesting that there was a media cover-up and so forth. So we realized that there are a lot of people that are on our side, and we have to connect to them. So that's where the student groups come in. And there's our website. Thanks, Tony. The website is really professional. We found that our goal is to try to appeal to academians in the community. And by having a really well-structured website, what we do is on a bi-weekly basis, members of the group go in, we speak to professors in different faculties. We've gone to civil engineering professors, we've gone to history professors, and we've accomplished about 30 of them. What we found was about 25 or 27 of them had extreme doubts. After 2 minutes though, after talking with them after 2 minutes, then they let it out. At first they pretend like they don't know anything, but then they let it out and they're like, there's no way those buildings came down, son. So you will find, if you, I've heard that a lot of you might have an interest in activism or are already taking part in it. And I would suggest to try to think about forming a University of Lethbridge 9/11 research group, expand the chapters. Professor Michael Keefer recently was at the University of Toronto. He gave a very informative and eloquent speech, and I believe that created the UFT 9/11 chapter. So you'll find that many students there at Lethbridge share the views that we have as well, and they'll come together.
I'd like to welcome Josh Blakeney. He took both versions of the Globalization course last year. Josh, could you introduce the person you brought into the conference?
Ahmed and I are quite new friends. We met this semester just casually talking about various matters, and he invited Ahmed if he'd be interested in taking part in this conference, because I think it's pretty important that we don't just brush over it, don't just gloss over this as I think a lot of students find it's easy to be cynical about these things. Oh, sort of what if they did do it? But 100 Canadian soldiers have lost their lives, and 1 million Iraqis have lost their lives, and many Afghani people, and many people throughout the world have lost their lives as a result of this. It's not just this hasn't affected us in Lethbridge. Well, big deal sort of thing. I think this is Globalization Studies class, and if we look at it globally and holistically, then this is an important issue, and therefore I find that just casual conversations with people adds to the discourse on this, and I'm open-minded. I just want to learn more about this because I really know very little actually. So
Professor Keefer did work and is a renowned scholar in the field of Renaissance literature and the demonization of witches in some of the literature that Professor Keefer studies, gives an interesting link into 9/11 and how essentially we've seen an event whose interpretation demonizes, could we say, the Muslim world, the Arab world. I've never really seen a war where the enemy is defined in such vague terms, in such undefined terms, that it really can be directed wherever those pursuing this so-called war on terror want to take it. Give us an introduction to the Canadian dimension of the war on terror, if you would, please.
Yeah, there are two crucial aspects here, I think. Two things we need to reflect on. One is Canada's involvement in the occupation of Afghanistan, and I think that's already been alluded to by some of our student partners on the Lethbridge end of this exchange. We have lost something like 100 lives. Now that's a minuscule number compared with the numbers of civilians who've been killed by the American forces during the invasion of Afghanistan, and subsequently by the occupation forces supplied by allies of the United States, including Canada. First thing to say about that war is that it is unambiguously illegal in terms of international law.
Supreme crime.
A supreme crime. It's
supreme
crime. It is.
According to Nuremberg.
Exactly, John. Yes. In terms of the Nuremberg laws that are an accepted part of international law, it was a war of aggression, of unprovoked aggression, and that is the supreme crime against international law. So and we could go into some detail if we wanted, I suppose, as to the different aspects of the history immediately prior to the invasion, the manner in which the media misrepresented the situation in collaboration with the misrepresentation circulated by the American government. Fact is, though, for present purposes, the invasion was flagrantly illegal. The occupation is therefore illegal. Canada is involved in an ongoing and grave violation of international law in Afghanistan. And the situation is exacerbated by the further violations of international law that are involved in the details of our occupation. For example, the fact that Canada is a signatory to the Geneva Conventions and the puppet government of Karzai in Afghanistan is not a signatory to these conventions. Those conventions therefore prohibit Canadian soldiers from handing over any prisoners they might have to a non-signatory power. That is, of course, exactly what we've been doing, and there's significant evidence that many of the